When last we talked, we were heading into a couple of game sevens to end round number 2. And now we've got two teams up 2-0 in the third round, the conference finals. Yes, we are recording this episode before game 3 between the London Knights and Kitchener Rangers because we have to bring content to you around our work schedules. My name is Mike Farwell. Find me on X at Farwell_OHL, or find me at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium tonight. By the time you hear this, it'll be too late, but you get the idea with work schedules. Dan Mahar is the guy on the other side. You'll find him on X at his name, Dan Mahar, and you can drop us an email anytime on this podcast. We love hearing from you. OHL podcast at Rogers.com. We will get into our second round analysis, those game sevens, our predictions for round 3 and what we've seen so far. But starting with some news around the league. Dan, I don't know about you, but I raised a bit of an eyebrow at the wording that was used when Matt Turek's time in Brantford came to an end. The general manager, according to the team, the Brantford Bulldogs, could not agree to terms on a new contract, and that was it. Several hours later, the team puts a very positive post on social media thanking Matt Turek for his time. But this one strikes me as a wee bit odd. What about you?
Yeah, lots of potential things going on behind the scenes here. Whenever a new owner comes in, as we know, the Brantford Bulldogs were recently purchased by the Hyman family. And when that happens, sometimes they have an idea around budget. They have an idea around people they may want to bring in, philosophical differences about how the organization will be run or who might be involved in these decisions. Doesn't always line up with the existing staff. So not sure which one or which ones of those it could be, but all I know is it is peculiar when you had a GM of the caliber of Matt Turek, who had achieved some great things for that Brantford Bulldogs franchise. I'm sure most fans of that organization were looking forward to him staying and having a bit of a tenure there. But so it's tough to hear when a guy like that is not returning. So we'll see what they have in store, but it is peculiar.
The track record, I think, speaks for itself as far as Matt Turek is concerned, right? Helps build the Bulldogs to a champion in 2018, does it again in 2022, leads them and leaves them in very good shape after a year during which they may have exceeded expectations. I think you have to give a tip of the hat or a tap of the stick to the coaching staff led by Jay McKee in that case with the Bulldogs this year, finishing first in the East. But Dan, if I were a betting man, and I've been known to lay the occasional wager, let's just say DraftKings Sportsbook had odds on this, would you bet that a Hyman, somebody with the last name Hyman, comes in as the general manager here?
I would say that's safest bet probably, and an even safer bet is that at very least someone affiliated with the family or having some connections to the family. That's typically how these things go down, and that certainly aligns with the whispers we hear. So yeah, I would think so, because I don't think you turf a guy like Matt Turek or fail to come to a contract agreement with Matt Turek unless you have someone like that in mind.
Yeah, failed to come to a contract agreement with. Again, I find the language odd. It's not a firing, it's not a resignation. It makes it sound as though, well, we just couldn't arrive at the same number and we have parted amicably. Again, all of this coming from the team side. We haven't heard from Matt Turek. I hope in all of this that the coaching staff is in a good place. But again, when you're bringing in your own people, so to speak, that's not always the way that it works. The general manager might have something else in mind, or that certainly is a close working relationship between the head coach and the GM, and who knows what that looks like. And I got to say, you mentioned those whispers, Dan, and they might become full volume voices in short order here, because the reason I think the whispers are out there is if we look at the history of the Hyman family, right? And we know that Father Stewart was embroiled in some controversy a couple of decades ago when he started essentially turning minor hockey teams in the Toronto area into for-profit organizations. He had at one time more than 90 teams under his control. And a lot of people were raising eyebrows back then, talking about the way these teams were being run, almost with a pro style, certainly beyond the style that 10, 11, 12 year olds would expect in hockey. And professional coaches paid, skills coaches, fees for the teams. If you wanted to play on them, fees for the families went up significantly, doubling in some cases, many thousands of dollars a year. Families were being expected to pay to play for these teams because the idea was, if you want to get your kids to the National Hockey League, again, remember, sometimes we're talking about 10 and 11 and 12-year-old kids, but this was the system you had to move them through, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of people talked about that being a vehicle for Stuart Hyman to ensure his own kids' hockey success. Now, look, there's no disputing Zach Hyman's hockey success to this very day. I'm not taking anything away from that. And while controversial a couple of decades ago when Stuart Hyman started buying up all of these teams and creating this machine in the Greater Toronto area, it wasn't unacceptable to everyone. There were people who said this is the right way to go. This is the model that hockey needs, et cetera, et cetera. But if you've got a situation back in the early 2000s where a father was trying to ensure that his kids had their best chance for success in hockey, it's difficult to imagine that today, all this time later, he doesn't want his kids to have their best chance for success at the major junior level as coaches, as managers, as executives, you name it. And I can't help but think of the Burke situation in Niagara that did not end well, with Billy and Joey kind of running the show on the ice. And things are still not great in Niagara with an owner that seems intent on doing things his way. I'll just put those out there as caveats. This has been a real good story in Brantford so far since the Bulldogs got there. We know the arena deal is in place and everybody's pretty excited. This, to me, makes me move forward a little more cautiously, optimistically.
Yeah, and everything you just said, the background context, I mean, it could be summed up as, do the ends justify the means in terms of how Stuart Hyman dealt with the hockey in the Greater Toronto area? And you remember all those criticisms, you referenced them about, was he just trying to get Zach a pathway to higher level hockey? And Zach certainly answered the bell on that. And, you go out and score 50 in the NHL, it kind of vindicates what dad was doing. So I'm sure all Brantford fans can hope is that, he's going to be vindicated here as well. I think when you operate that way, it's hard for a lot of people to say that the ends justify the means, because the means tend to victimize some people along the way, kind of unfairly. Potentially Matt Turek in this case, amongst others who were looking for spots in the GTHL and just couldn't afford them. So there's a lot of questions that come out of the background context of the Hyman family. But I think, yeah, at the end of the day, things were trending really well in Brantford. Things were going quite smoothly. It was a well-operated franchise. Fans were getting full value for their money. Everything was positive. And when you have that, there's a bit of a risk because everything's looking good. So is there only one way to go from here? Hopefully not. Hopefully the Hyman family proves their worth again. But little trying times, I guess.
I would say that. And early days for sure, but we will continue to watch with interest and listen for those whispers to get any louder if indeed they do. I don't think Matt Turek will be out of work for very long. This guy has way too good a track record with the Brantford Bulldogs in the Ontario Hockey League to be out of work for too long. But it's a tough go right now. Hang in there, Bulldogs fans. The team is still well built. Turek leaves it in very good hands. So, things are looking good for the foreseeable future, and we'll just hope for the best. You referenced, Dan, the position that the team was in. When Michael Andlauer handed over the keys to the front door, he handed over the keys to an organization that was embedded in the community and doing all the right things. So we'll just hope that it continues along like this. Outside looking in, I mean, I'm not a hockey man. I'm not somebody that's in a position like the Hymans are to own a team, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You've got yourself here basically the golden goose, or the golden egg from the golden goose in Brantford. Don't rock the boat. Things are going just fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Because if you look at it, I mean, teams deal with this type of dynamic. When you think of really good coaches, things are going really well. Team has a good coach, then he gets pilfered by the pro ranks, right? You say, well, it's going really well. Now we have to find a new coach. That happens. The difference here is you have a really good GM that at least presumably did not want to leave. He wanted to stay, and that has changed. So that's the slight difference. But you're right. We'll I guess time will tell.
From your lips, Dan Mahar, to the ears of the commissioner in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, or pardon me, the Quebec Maritimes Junior Hockey League. I'm still not used to that yet. And I know that you must be enthusiastic now that the Ontario Hockey League is next. The Q announcing that it's about to move in the same direction that the WHL has already gone when it comes to playoffs. Sure, hockey teams in our league, we will give you the higher seeding as incentive to win your division. But that lasts for one round and one round only going into the playoffs. After the first round, things get reseeded. That's the way it goes in the dub. That's the way it's going to start going in the Q. And you're on record on this podcast, Dan Mahar, as saying you think the O needs to follow suit like that.
Yeah, I mean, I quite simply, I think there's logic in why the other two leagues are doing it. It just, from a fairness standpoint, from a variety standpoint, I mean, there's various standpoints you could look at why this just makes sense. And the only one I could think of that was against making this move was maybe a little bit of extra travel. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me, especially in Ontario, where you've got such a confined geographic space for where all these teams exist. So to me, it just makes sense. The rounds would have looked a lot different. I mean, look at this second round we just witnessed in the OHL. You would have had, London facing would have been, I guess, Oshawa in the second round. You could have reseeded that way to have that type of dynamic in the second round. To me, it just makes it more interesting. You get different matchups, more rewarded for being finishing higher in the standings. You don't have a couple 100-point teams facing off that early in the playoffs. So yeah, I think for all things considered, it just makes that much more sense, and it kind of rewards the teams who do well.
Yeah, and even if you keep it within the conferences, although I like your idea of just breaking down the conferences when you're down to the final eight, just reseeding based on regular season points 1 through 8 and going from there. But even if you left it with the conferences, Oshawa would have earned home ice then in the second and third rounds. And don't they? I mean, it doesn't seem to matter at this point the way Oshawa is going, but you'd think they deserve that. And I know, even though in hindsight it didn't matter, but the Kitchener Rangers were vocal about that even before the second round started. They were 4 points better than the Windsor Spitfires in the regular season, but had to play 4 road games in that second round to pull off their 7-game victory.
Yeah, and I think the big piece that kind of annoyed the Kitchener Rangers was, you have the home ice aspect, which could be a big piece. And you also have the draft. They didn't reseed the draft, so Windsor got to double dip in terms of having home ice advantage and picking higher in the draft, which makes absolutely no sense to anyone, I don't think. I think even Windsor fans, now that the dust has settled and the season's over, would even say, yeah, that's kind of silly. Like, if we're going forward, we could run into this situation. I'd rather you can't have it both ways. So I think the bottom line is just apply logic here, like the other two leagues have done, and I'd love to see the OHL follow suit.
And I love your idea or your phrasing of double dipping. I've used it many times since you first used it. You're right. You shouldn't get the higher draft pick while you also had the higher seed in the playoffs. But even to take away the home ice advantage and whether or not that does help you win a series, let's not forget the economic advantage of this too. For any franchise that's in, and I know nobody's holding red tag days for the Kitchener Rangers or the Windsor Spitfires or the London Knights, etc. But listen, when Owen Sound and when some of these smaller markets are in the playoffs, the more home games they get, the higher the gate, the more revenue, the healthier they are economically. Reward them for what they do during the regular season. It just makes 0 sense to not do it.
That's a fantastic point, Mike, because people listening might not understand that and say, whatever, it's maybe one home game. Ask those GMs about opening the books and what a home game means in the playoffs. And you talk about the break-even point for these teams, how generally speaking, a lot of these teams make it to the second round. They're in the black. A home date is a big deal for these teams. And yeah, you may not pay attention to the tiers of teams like London and Kitchener who have some money. But like you said, the Owen Sounds, the North Bays, that's a big deal. So for them, losing a home date based on some silly rule like this is doesn't sit well with me.
We certainly like this idea of the O going the way the dub long did, has been, and now the Q. Something else that's kind of in the ether right now is around overagers. And you and I have touched on this before, Dan, and I'd love to think it was the OHL podcast that motivated these conversations, but it's around allowing teams to carry a fourth overager, if you will, if that overager is a goalie. In other words, goaltenders become exempt from the overage position or counting against your overage total. We've long thought this makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, junior hockey is really an older players' league, especially when it comes to goaltenders. And you can have terrific goaltenders, and there's some outliers. Your Carter Georges, your Jack Ivan Kovics, who look ready at 17 or maybe even 16. But by and large, goalies are 18, 19, 20 before they really start taking off in this league. And with that noted, and you have this whole problem in Canada for the last couple decades of really not developing a lot of goaltenders, tend to move on to, they bring in some import goaltenders. There's the American hockey program is doing wonders with goaltending. So we have to get creative in how we look at how we develop some local goaltending talent. And maybe this is a way. Let them mature at different levels when they're younger. Not force them into confidence busting backup roles when they're young and still growing. Anyway, there's a lot of reasons I think it just makes sense, and it would probably strengthen the league as well because goalies are frankly by and large just better when they're 19 and 20, and so it should up the skill level as well.
I'm not sure there's an argument better than the Jackson Parsons argument from this season. Goaltenders tend to develop a little more slowly. They come into their own later. Why force a kid out before he turns 20 if there's no room for him on a roster because he's taking up that valuable overage position, and thus deny him the chance to play at this level and develop further? Again, look at the numbers Jackson Parsons put up this year, which are head and shoulders above any numbers he had put up prior in his OHL career.
Well, that's just it, Mike. You just hit the nail on the head with you're forcing them out. So because there's those precious three spots, and like you said, you have to use one on both a goalie and an overage. That takes away one of those spots. A lot of teams are going to say, you know what, we've got this kid who's 17. He can serve as backup. We'll kind of move on from this other kid. So it's pushing every year. It's pushing 4 or 5 goalies out of the league who probably are best served to stay in the league, and actually would probably best serve their teams if they were still in this league. So I think, yeah, the fourth overage slot that can only be used on a goalie eliminates that whole dynamic. You no longer are forcing goalies out because they don't have to use. If they have 2 goalies they'd rather use, fine, they still get their 3 overage slots. If they don't use it on a goalie, it doesn't mean they get a fourth for another kid. This will cease that practice of forcing a kid out, and I think that's a good thing.
Speaking of threes, the 3 overage positions that we're talking about, adding the fourth, if you will, if it's a goaltender in that overage position, something I got to address on the pod last week, Dan, when you weren't able to be here, is the idea of a third import being allowed onto CHL rosters. I got to say, I hate being on the fence, but I still find myself on the fence on this. On the one hand, I'm all for the argument and I generally support it. We want the very best players and teams on the ice for fans to see. That's probably the best for the health of the league overall. But I started to think about the kid that's playing in the Northern Ontario Junior Hockey League right now that wants to make the step to the O, and all of a sudden there's one less roster spot potentially available to them because we're now looking at a global talent pool by adding an extra OA position. So I haven't really landed on one side of that fence or another. And believe me, it's getting uncomfortable on these pickets. But how do you feel about the possibility of a third import position?
Well, if it makes you feel better, Mike, there's reason to be on the fence. And that reason is what you just hit on, is that local kids, that's one slot less for them. You can definitely make the argument that having a third import enhances this overall skill level in the league, and that's what they're after. It's a better product, more scouts eyes on the league, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of reasons for both. I think one consideration is that we've seen in recent years, imports are kind of less committed to the OHL than they ever were. It used to be you could bring in an import at 17 and you'd have them for 3 years. We're seeing more and more import players using the OHL as a 1 or 2 year stepping stone, and then potentially going back and playing pro in Europe or being assigned elsewhere. So it's a consideration these teams are going to have to weigh when they are going to bring in an overager, or sorry, an extra import. Is it worth us bringing in a kid who might be here a year or two, or do we stick with the local kid who's going to be here 3 or 4 years? So all these things just bring more strategy, more management into it. But I think to your point about being on the fence, there's obviously reason to be on the fence, and reason why this league has not adopted this fully yet and is just considering it. But I come back to the argument of higher skill level in the league, more talented the league is, the more of a destination it is, the better.
One more little bit of housekeeping from last week's episode when I mentioned Ernie Godden's all-time record for goals in a season. My buddy CB always fact-checking me. I said Godden had 89. It was, of course, 87. I don't think Ernie cares that I gave him 2 more goals, and I don't care if it's 87 or 89. It's never being broken, even though Dan Mahar said it would some. So CB, just get off my case, buddy. Get off my case. Ernie Godden, 87. No, thank you. Stay on my case. I should be accurate about these things. Dan Mahar still says it's never to be broken. 87, or it will be broken. Pardon me. I say never. Dan says someday. Maybe we should get DraftKings Sportsbook onto that, Dan.
Yeah, well, I think I just hedged my bets there, Mike. Because when you say someday, that could be 100 years from now. So
Yeah, and neither you nor I nor CB, boy, that guy's going even sooner than you and me. I've seen the way he lives. I've seen his lifestyle. Anyway, we'll just leave that right there. But Ernie Godden's OHL record for goals in a season, 87. Not to be confused with what some knucklehead on this podcast said a week ago. This is what happens when Dan goes away. I can't be held responsible for myself. All right. We still have a second round redux to go back and take a look at. Game 7s times 2 to end the second round. And what a third round we have, down to the final 4, plus our performers of the week still to come. Don't go anywhere. We have only just begun this week's episode of the OHL podcast. The NBA 82 game grind is done, and now the real fun begins. The NBA playoffs are here, and it's time for all the high stakes drama, clutch moments, and jaw dropping plays. I can't wait. If you're looking to make the playoffs even more exciting, DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered as an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Try placing a bet on your favorite player's performance. Will they drop 30 points, 40, more? It's your call. And here's something special for first timers. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Make it a playoff run to remember with DraftKings. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Dan, before we move into our round 3 predictions, and again, we will work on the honor system, and I know our loyal listeners will understand how honest we are when we recap our round 2 predictions, because I think we both were the same, 500 on it, but we'll get to that. I may have forgotten your picks, but let's take a look back. When we left off last week, it was headed into 2 game 7s. Kingston home to Barrie, and the Windsor Spitfires home to Kitchener. We obviously know the Colts and the Rangers advanced, but your thoughts on how round 2 closed out a little over a week ago?
So I think overall, I would say round 2 went, despite my 2 for 4 on the predictions, because I got both those game 7s wrong. I think it went generally how I expected. I expected London would have a relatively easy ride. Barrie and Kingston was a bit of a coin toss. I just really loved what Kingston was doing second half of the year. And then Kitchener Windsor I thought was a coin toss too, that might come down to the home ice we talked about before. So also a coin toss. Oshawa, I've been on their bandwagon pretty much all year too, feeling they're the strongest in the East and would come out of the East. So that's been the case as well. But I think I had said, and I think you quoted me as saying, this could be the best second round we have had in a decade. So that's up for debate. I think we definitely got some really great series and some great talking points from that. I mean, when you have a game 7 going to overtime, a reverse sweep, I guess is what we're calling it, from 0-3 to 4-3. You had that fantastic Barry Kingston series, which was back and forth, came right down to the wire as well, needed an empty net goal. So there was really some intrigue for sure. But it'd be up for debate whether or not that was the best in 10 years. Just there was not a lot of weak links in that second round, Mike.
And the Kitchener Rangers, that game that went to overtime, Rangers winning it 2-1. First of all, let's acknowledge what the Windsor Spitfires were up against in terms of adversity, playing without so many players. And I don't know how healthy Liam Greentree was, even when the series ended. He had to take a game off in the midst of it just after his 5-goal performance, record setting, franchise record setting, that is, 5-goal performance. But he came down with some sort of illness. I don't think he was quite the same in games 6 and 7, despite giving it his best effort. Still, that's not to take away anything from what the Kitchener Rangers were up against and able to do, because I don't care how banged up you are. You got the first 3, you needed just one more, and you had 4 tries to do it. And the Kitchener Rangers joined the 1988 Ottawa 67s, the 05 and 2010 Windsor Spitfires. Took me a second there to get it right. Yes, it was the Windsor Spitfires. Then in 2014, it was Peterborough coming back against Kingston. And in 2019, Guelph did it to the London Knights. Those are the only teams in history, now joined by the Kitchener Rangers, who have come back from 0-3 down to win a series. That's pretty special stuff.
It is. So in both teams, I know someone has to lose and is not going to be happy about it, but both teams faced plenty of adversity in that series. Both teams acquitted themselves well. We saw first 2 games what Kitchener without Luke Elness, what it meant, because that kid's a playoff warrior and pretty much came back and wrestled the series away from Windsor almost single-handedly. So terrific stuff from them, and just a couple unsung heroes I'd like to point out on both sides. You have 16-year-old Jacob Zoo thrown into the fire for Kitchener, started taking a regular shift, acquitted himself extremely well. And on the Windsor side, yeah, we talked about, their 16-year-old star, Ethan Belchet's out with his injury. Woodall, Mathurin, they had a Spellacy missed games. They had a lot of injury problems. But same thing on that side. The future is so bright. You look at how Robinson and Hicks operated in that series, young kids that just look like pros in a really experience heavy series in a second round tense series. So I think win or lose for those two teams, you look at it and say, wow, there's just so much to look forward to coming from those teams and battling through adversity for their fans. So, and when it comes down to overtime, or a 1-goal game in game 7, I think it really is a coin toss. Could have gone either way. Joey Costanzo was terrific for Windsor. Nothing he could really do on that goal. So yeah, it gave us a lot to be appreciative of when you take that few days later look back, Mike, and you think, wow, there was some impressive play in that series.
Those two teams, the Kitchener Rangers and Windsor Spitfires, played every other day for the duration of the series. So I'm around the Rangers all the time. That was about 2 weeks solid and a lot of trips into Windsor to get to know that team and the players that play for it. Some quality young men I had the opportunity to meet over my time doing that series. And let me tell you, from the top to bottom, I got a lot of time for the way the Windsor Spitfires are running their organization. It's pro top to bottom. And yes, the future looks bright, and I'm glad for it, for the franchise, because of the way they're running things there. On the other side of the league, of course, with Kingston, we both thought, I think, Dan, that this was a year that things were finally going to turn around and some roses would bloom in the Limestone City. And I guess they just ran up against a Colts team that had other ideas this year.
Yeah, I just spent the weekend in the Limestone City and staying just a block away from the Slush Puppy Center and thinking about that and time to reflect on what could have been, I guess. And you look at how good they were down the stretch. They had a veteran team built for this year. They were so good. And then you get to that game 7 and you look at how quickly things can turn. And we talk about the war of attrition and players in and out. And, Quentin Burns gets thrown out of that game for a slew foot, and that could be the difference. You're talking about the biggest minute eater on the team, an all situations guy, their captain, their leader. Remove him from the game, and you end up losing basically a 1-goal game. I know there was an empty netter very late, but essentially, that's a guy who would have been on with the goalie pulled. This is a guy who might have prevented one or two of those late Barry goals. So yeah, it's that close. So when you evaluate the season in Kingston, do you say, well, that's disappointing, they went out in round 2, or do you say, they were a call, they were a kick, they were a tip from going to round 3 and potentially even winning the conference? So I think they have to look at it as a success. The leaps and bounds they made in terms of system play structure, the coaching there this year was fantastic. How to build a team, how to get over the hump. A lot of positives for Kingston as well. The tough part will be that they were an older team, and there's going to be some graduations that will hit hard. But I think you got to look at it as a positive this year in Kingston.
I think it's a great point on the structure and the way they're playing under Troy Mann. The big challenge is, yes, the graduation. And don't forget, 19, Dan, 19 draft picks were spent at the deadline in order to build that team. So graduations, and you're going to have to restock that draft cupboard. So you're at the beginning stages of the next cycle, and fans there in Kingston, 5,000 plus of which turned out for one of those playoff games, which was great to see heading into the Easter weekend. But it's going to be a bit of a wait to see the return of that kind of hockey in that city.
Unfortunately, likely, but don't discount what good coaching can do for accelerating a kind of rebuild. And I mean, we saw it in Kitchener this year, right? A team that was supposed to be rebuilding pretty young, and what do they do? 100 points. So don't count those fronts out next year. They have some good things to build upon, and there's still some good young players there. You looked at how Hopkins really came on in the second half, Mike, and some of these young skilled players they have there that will lead the next wave in Kingston. But yeah, I'm not sure it'll be as good next year standings wise, but still plenty to build on.
Okay, let's move on to round number 3. And as we start looking at this, own up to, on the honor system, our second round predictions, both of us going 2 for 4. I got both Western Series right teams, but wrong in games. I had London in 6 and Kitchener in 6. The only reason I took Kitchener in 6 is because everybody was taking it to go the distance. So I thought I'd be different. Too bad. If I'd gone the distance, I would have had a number of games and team, but I got both of those. I had Brantford in 7 on the Eastern side because I thought home ice would be the difference maker. And I had Kingston in 6 because I still couldn't figure out the Barrie Colts, and are they ever making? Oh, Oshawa's making me look dumb too. I picked them to lose both series so far, and Barrie made me look kind of foolish in the second round. So I was 2 for 4 overall, which I believe you also were, Dan.
Correct. Yeah. So same. I had Oshawa over Brantford in 7. I had Kingston. I was big on Kingston, and same as you. I hadn't figured out Barrie either. I had them winning in 6. On the Western side, I had Windsor over Kitchener in 7. Figured that was going 7 for sure, and just thought the home ice might tip it. And then I gave Erie a game. I had London winning in 5. And as you saw in the final game, London scored in overtime. I called the war room, said, I have them in 5 games. Can you review this? They overturned it. They played again. They scored another goal. I called the war room again. They said, stop calling here. London, you win. So I almost had the right number of games, but that's how I got my 2 of 4, Mike.
I love how hard you work, Dan Mahar. That's what you bring to this podcast, and I love it. Okay, let's start in the East. And I'm looking again. You have to take Dan and I on the honor system here. We have shared our predictions with one another prior to the series beginning, but timing being what it is, we like to release these every Tuesday morning. So consistent releases for you, but it doesn't always align with the playoffs. I'm not doubting Oshawa anymore. I had Oshawa in 6 in the East, and they are certainly off to an excellent start, winning 2 games on the road.
Correct. And I had the exact same, Mike. I had Oshawa in 6. Looking good, looking like they might potentially even make that shorter. So we'll see. But yeah, just that full package, right? The like we always talked about, goaltending, defense, forward. There's no weakness on that squad. Built for the playoffs, starting to show it. That one's looking good.
Starting to show it. It seems to me, and I got to watch a couple of the games towards the end of that Brantford Oshawa series. I get the feeling, Dan, that Oshawa is getting better as these playoffs go on. And listen, in on a team that is full of stars, Colby Barlow really seems to be enjoying this time of the playoffs. He looks mean. He's playing with a snarl, and he's putting up the kind of points you'd expect from a first round NHL pick.
Yeah, it's funny because Colby Barlow, had some struggles. I think it's fair to say last season and first part of this year, and some people questioning, it doesn't look like Colby Barlow yet. And this is why I never get too concerned with these players, because when the time comes and it's playoff time and these guys are going to show up, and it's almost like they can flick a switch and turn on another gear, and he's certainly doing that, leading the OHL in scoring as of this recording, and all the other components. I mean, I've talked many times about the addition of Andrew Gibson being a massive ad, maybe as big an ad as any team in the league made this year, in terms of a guy that's just going to play in all situations, nearly impossible to beat, and chip in some offense as he's done in these playoffs. So, yeah, when I think you look up and down that roster, it's just if they found their gear, which they're doing, and maybe they just didn't feel they needed to in the regular season, they were going to get in, and now when they need it, it's there, and look out.
I'm not about to write off the Barrie Colts just yet. I feel like I did that in the last round, but the likes of Bo Jelsma, Cole Baudouin, Riley Patterson, Kayshawn Aitchison, who we've talked about endlessly on this podcast this year, the great goaltending tandem, it ain't over for the Barrie Colts by any stretch yet. However, much like the London Knights on the west side, which we'll get to in a moment, motivated by that Memorial Cup final loss last year to Saginaw, the Oshawa Generals, we knew from a season ago, swept out of the OHL final by the London Knights, were motivated to get back and obviously improve on last year. And this team, again, seemingly getting better as the playoffs go on, is on course to do that. This Oshawa team is a force to be reckoned with right now.
Oh, for sure. And yeah, this is nothing against the Barrie Colts. And like you said, it's 2-0. Barrie could turn around and win their games, and it's 2-2. And easy enough, but it's concerning when you see the 7-1 whitewashing, and you think, is this a team that's broken now? They know sometimes you see that in the playoffs, Mike, when you're running into just a brute force like Oshawa that's kind of firing on all cylinders, and it kind of breaks your spirit a little. I'm not saying that's what's happening with the Barrie Colts. Plenty of time to get back in it here, but yeah, it just, to me, it feels like maybe a mountain just a little bit too high right now.
Speaking of running into a brute force, how about the Kitchener Rangers running into the buzzsaw that is the London Knights in the West Final? Again, Dan and I recording before Game 3, so our predictions could look even worse by the time you're listening to this. I had London in 6. I thought Kitchener getting that far in a series, building on some momentum from the Windsor series, would be about as good as they could hope for against this really strong London team. The Knights 10-0 out of the gates to start these playoffs. 14-0 is the OHL record set by the 2019 Ottawa 67s, in case you're wondering. But gosh, is this London team ever good?
Yeah, prediction wise, I mean, I had this one going 5 games in favor of London. I mean, I'm a big believer in Kitchener and everything they've done. They're well coached, they're structured, there's tons of character, not a lot of quit. Still feel like they'll pull out a game somehow, but I would have predicted London to win this series just based on all those factors. They are the deepest team, the most skilled team, the fastest team, structured team, you name it. They're all those things. So they likely were winning this series either way. But then you factor in a little bit of rest there against kind of a beat up Kitchener team, and a Kitchener team whose depth of scoring is a bit of an issue, and who have seen their top scorer miss the last 2 series, is not likely coming back. And then their number one center in Christian Humphreys injured early in game 1 of the series. Carson Campbell, who's been a very important defenseman to them. And it sounds like excuse making, but when you start pulling these components out of that Kitchener roster, I'm not sure they're getting this series is going to be shorter. I'll put you that way.
Yeah, and listen, London will say, hang on a second, we are without our captain, Denver Barkey, who got injured late in game number 1. But to your point on depth, Dan, and this isn't, say, don't worry about London or woe is Kitchener. But the reality is the depth of London, like the caliber of that depth is just, you lose a Denver Barkey, you elevate a Landon Sim. When the Kitchener Rangers are without Adrian Misiljevic for 2 series and then Christian Humphreys, you're starting to go a little bit lower on your depth chart. You just don't have that same caliber of player to step up. I think this Rangers team has proved a lot of doubters wrong all season long. You mentioned earlier it was supposed to be a rebuilding team that ends up going out and putting up 100 points after trading away a 52-goal scorer in the offseason. So I'm not ready to write any Kitchener Rangers team off this season, or this Kitchener Rangers team off. I still think goaltender Jackson Parsons has something to give in the absence of some of these offensive weapons that the Rangers have on the sidelines right now, but it's becoming a much taller order for the Kitchener Rangers.
That's for sure. And I'm not ready to write the postmortem either. Like you said, there's still time left for them. I mean, they just came back from down 3-0. So how crazy would we be to say it's over? Having said that, I think the positives Kitchener can draw right now is you're witnessing, Mike. There's some young players playing a super. I thought Luca Romano's been terrific for the Rangers in the first couple games, despite the losses. That's a young player. Uh, there's some really unsung heroes there, and I think a guy, Mike, for me that never gets nearly enough credit when we're talking about the Kitchener Rangers is Jakub Kromiak on the back end. He's just terrific in all zones, and he's competing game in, game out. And the lessons learned from efforts like that trickle down the lineup. And you see, we mentioned Jacob Zoo earlier, and Alexander Bilecki got in his first game yesterday, and Max Diracolo, and some of these guys who will be back. They see this. This is lessons, this is development, and that's why you see players, from 16 or 17 years old turning 18, 19 take big steps forward, is because of the examples they're seeing set. So again, despite the fact it's not over yet, still lots of positives for Kitchener to draw from this, and getting to the third round against a team like London. Your odds were low, so just acquit yourself as best you can, and you never know.
I will say that I enjoyed game 2 in the London Kitchener series a whole heck of a lot more than I enjoyed game 1. In game 1, London roars out to the 3-0 lead, barely 6 minutes in. It's 4-0 after 1. And we've talked about this before, and I'm not knocking it. Make no mistake. London has historically played the 1-2-2, the trap, whatever you want to call it. They protect leads very well. And as they're doing that, they will capitalize on any opportunity you give them to add to their lead. But they fell into that shell. And over and above that, there were a lot of antics in game number 1, a lot of intimidation or attempts at intimidation. And it just seems silly to me. There didn't seem a lot of flow in the game. It was a relatively similar story in game number 2, with London getting the lead 2-0, but the Rangers battling back a bit. And then London opening up a 2-goal lead again. So they're up by 2 going into the third. But instead of, at least it seemed to my eyes, falling back into that defensive mindset, the trap, whatever, there were several shifts that it was really fun for me, just as a hockey fan, to watch London operate in the offensive zone. They'll cycle the puck around. They'll wait for their chance. They'll move it. They'll get it here. They'll get it there. Oh, there's a shot. We're going to retrieve the puck on the battle along the boards. We're going to start moving it around the zone again. It was, I enjoyed it. It was much more to me like London almost decided we need the third goal because this team already came back on us, or the next goal to make it a 3-goal lead because this team already came back from 2 down. So instead of sitting back, they kind of took the game a little bit more to the Kitchener Rangers. I enjoyed watching it. I enjoy hockey played that way. I don't know how much more anybody can say about how dynamic Easton Cowan is, and goodness gracious, do I love Oliver Bonk on the back end. It's just ridiculous how good that young man is. And then, of course, there are so many more players you could list off. But enjoyed it more. And one of the other reasons I think maybe I enjoyed game 2 of that series more is because instead of antics and intimidation or attempts at intimidation, the guys decided we're going to actually get the fighting out of the way. Andrew McNeil versus Ryder Bolton, and then Matthew Halichar versus Rene Van Bommel. And it seemed to me like we kind of got it out of our system. Okay, these guys are going to do that, and the rest of us are going to play some hockey.
Yeah, I would say the same, Mike. I'm not a big fan of the antics and the post whistle stuff and all the intimidation garbage. Yeah, I know people are going to say, "Oh, it's playoff hockey." It's still hockey. The sport is hockey, and that stuff to me is a sideshow, and it just gets nonsensical. Because you're absolutely right on the hockey end. I mean, I just love the teams that can execute plays at speed. And if you're a coach listening to this and you're designing your practices, always implement that stuff. Taking passes on speed, picking up the rim arounds without bobbling, making passes at speed, taking passes at speed. The more you do at speed, the more your game will start to look like what we see from London when things are going well. And like you said, we're not into the gutter and into the antics. Because what I'm seeing in this series, Mike, is one team operating pretty consistently at speed, and that's really giving trouble to about half of the other lineup, where they are a more measured approach, and for them to be effective, it's a 5-man in sync, and speed takes you out of sync. Speed takes you out of that structured system, and then you start relying more on one-on-one matchups. And Kitchener's just having a few too many guys they're struggling with those based on the speed and the ability for that team to execute at speed. And what, like you said, when you get a Denver Barkey out of the lineup, and a Montgomery, a Reed, a Nickel can step up there, those guys all have that speed and ability to operate at speed. And as a team, that just becomes a bit too much for your opponent. And it's a nice thing to watch, as you pointed out.
Just one more note on this. You mentioned earlier, Dan, some young Kitchener Rangers that have really stood out to you, bodes well for the future. Romano, Jacob Zoo, who I think has just been terrific with a baptism by fire. I think Cameron Arquette's been quite good as well. Do you think Andrew McNeil knows that he's not yet 18 years old? Because it was like, honest to goodness, it was about a month ago, whatever it was, and he tuned up Landon Sim, an overager, in a game between Kitchener and London. I don't think Landon Sim knew Andrew McNeil was a lefty. And then in game 2 of this series, arguably, McNeil goes up against the reigning league heavyweight in Ryder Bolton, certainly one of the toughest players the league knows, and Andrew McNeil was none the worse for wear after that tilt. I'll just say this: Andrew McNeil can play on my team anytime.
Well, and like, for obvious reasons, right now there's a focus on the fights, and yeah, Ryder Bolton comes at you and throws a couple punches before you even know you're in a fight, and you come back that well. That's impressive. And Landon Sim is no slouch in the fighting department. So those are impressive things. But I'll tell you a little piece about Andrew McNeil. So he's drafted as a 4th rounder, I believe, out of the Peterborough area, and because of Kitchener having 3 16-year-olds, didn't make the team last year. But watching their rookie camp and their training camp, he's the kid that impressed me the most, Mike. I thought this kid he has got a future in this league. He's big, he's rugged, he's positionally sound. He looks like a leader out there to me. And that was all of the scouting reports on him from his U16 year, that this is a captain in the making. This is a guy that plays the right way. He's gritty. He's a team guy. And I was watching him there saying, I know he's not going to be on Kitchener this year, but next year for sure. And then going forward, he'll play a big role. And people talk about him as maybe the replacement for Matthew Andonovski, that type of piece. And I see it all day. I think that kid adds a little bit of foot speed, and look out, because he's a player, Mike. He's just a hockey player.
There is still a future on this episode of the OHL podcast. We have not yet gotten to our performer of the week, performers, one from each of us, and we're going to dip into the email inbox in just a moment. Stay with us on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. Real quick, wanted to touch on an email that Jeremy sent us to ohlpodcast@rogers.com. And I love it, Dan. It speaks to the consistency we talked about earlier, with which we try to put out our episodes every Tuesday morning. Jeremy says he looks forward to it because he gets to listen to it on his way home from his night shift. I like that idea. You put in a long night's work. You deserve the OHL podcast in your ears on Tuesday morning when you're headed home. Jeremy comes to us as a fan of the Barrie Colts, talking about the 15-year arena lease that the Colts have signed at Sadlin with the city of Barrie, but is hopeful because he's gone to many a game there as a child. He's now actually living in another city, but remains a Colts fan, but wants to see some upgrades. This is something I touched on during the podcast last week. And I think really, if we're going to be serious about the OHL in Barrie, we know 5,000 is the floor for the number of seats available in order to host a Memorial Cup sometime, should Barrie ever be interested in doing that. And being in the arena, it's not a knock. It's just the reality. More modern arenas have more modern amenities, private suites, etc. And I think the Sadlin could use some upgrades. And Jeremy via email seems to think, you know what? I think it could too.
Yeah, and Mike, you have definitely more experience with that facility, but that's just it. I think the league is moving more and more to look like a professional league, and with that, you need some professional amenities. And you forgive a couple years in an aging Brantford Civic Arena, Civic Center, because you know that what's coming, and there's upgrades, and there were some investments. But I think around the league in general, amenities matter, and I think that it's great that the 15-year lease is going to give some stability in that city, because absolutely Barrie should be a long time permanent member of this league. They had a great location, good market, good brand, you name it. But you're right. That commitment requires investment, and we'll see if it's there, because I think the Sadland could use a little bit of a makeover.
Jeremy going to games now where he lives in London, and I can tell you from having been there for the first two games in the West Final, boy, when that arena, like there's not much like it, looking around that arena from our vantage point in the broadcast booth and seeing fans like right up to the back row, backs against the wall. They love announcing their 9,000 plus every game in London. I can tell you it doesn't always pass the eye test, but in these playoffs, it certainly has. And if that's Jeremy's experience now, it just goes to show you how much further some arenas have to come along in some markets.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of Ontario, right? Like when you drive through
Yeah.
different cities and places in Ontario, some look like they're in 2025 and some look like they're in 1988, right? And that's just the charm of the province. But the league is a connected network, and yeah, they one needs to look a little bit like the other as they go forward.
I love that word charm. I will always use that when I'm in Owen Sound for a Saturday night at the Bayshore. Don't you ever change, Bayshore. Don't you ever change. All right. Our performers of the week is the place that we like to leave you every week. And I'll let you start us off, Dan. Who is the performer that caught your eye?
Okay, well, Mike, I kind of cheated because I have two, so I'm going to do one in a honorable mention. But before I do my honorable, I'll let you go in case you have the same guy. But so my main performer of the week is Beckett Seneca on Oshawa, and the reason being, this guy's a beast. Missed a few games with injury, wasn't sure if he was at 100%. So thrust back in the third round. What's he done? 5 points the first two games, hat trick and an assist in the last one. But more importantly, just looks like I'm taking this over. Looks like the third overall NHL pick. Physically just destroyed a couple players and also put points on the scoreboard. So starting to look a bit like a man amongst boys, despite only being an 18-year-old. So that's my performer of the week, Mike, for this week.
I think it's hilarious, Dan, that you didn't want to give your honorable mention lest you step on my pick for performer of the week with your honorable mention when you just go out then and step on my pick for performer of the week with your performer of the week. For all of the reasons you
There.
just stated, stepping up, taking control, Beckett Seneca is also who I identified as my performer of the week. What's interesting now might be even more interesting, and this will get scary if this happens. I was also running some numbers on another guy, but thought, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going with Beckett Seneca. So I stopped halfway through my work. Who's your honorable mention?
Well, I had to give an honorable mention to Austin Elliott in London, Mike. I mean, this guy doesn't lose. I mean, what's he lost? One game all year? Uh,
It's
and
42-1 right now.
Well, and people keep talking about, Parsons and George and all these other great goalies. Well, how about the guy that just doesn't lose? So, I mean, he's there when you need him, and I mean, you could say, regardless who you feel is the best goalie in the league or better goalie, I mean, he's pretty much outplaying everyone he goes up against in the moment, and so I felt remiss not to give him a nod based on what he's accomplished this year.
That's funny. The one I was going to give an honorable nod to was the goaltender that Elliott is facing. Now, again, performer of the week, I think we have to include the games that just finished. It hasn't been a great start for Jackson Parsons in the West Final, but how about the 5 games before that, during which he allowed only 6 goals, 2 shutouts? I mean, it's just a ridiculous set of numbers. I stopped short of calculating the save percentage, but it would have been north of 930, I'm pretty sure. So I had Jackson Parsons as a bit of an honorable mention there, but I'll leave that off. Doesn't count as an official honorable. I ended up with Beckett Seneca, and Dan gives the extra nod to Austin Elliott. 42-1. He won 20, lost his first regular season game, and has reeled off another 22 since then, playoffs included. It is impressive for sure. All right. Impressive is what we hope the Western Conference and Eastern Conference finals end up being. Right now, as we wrap up, it's Oshawa leading Barrie 2-0 and London leading Kitchener 2-0. No matter what, Dan, I think when we move on to the next round, we're still going to be enjoying some quality hockey in the Ontario Hockey League.
Yeah, and I mean, as much as you and I are in Kitchener, Mike, I don't think anyone's going to be too upset to see a rematch of London Oshawa if that's where we're trending. That's going to be a heavyweight tilt.
Okay, Fanzenberry, go after Dan Mahar. He just wrote off your Colts. He just wrote him off. For Jeremy coming home from the night shift and the rest of you who consume this podcast on a weekly basis, we appreciate it. Stay in touch with us online. Dan's on X at his name, at Dan Mahar. I'm at Farwell_OHL. You'll find us on Instagram at the OHL podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Download the podcasts automatically every week. Tell a friend, leave a review, all that good stuff, and shoot us an email. ohlpodcast@rogers.com. We are here every Tuesday morning on the OHL Podcast.